I would just like to officially welcome all of you to our panel discussion on the topic of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, which has been powered by Diversify and Herspace since December 2020. And time flies, we are meeting again in the month of March. 2022 is going too quickly. But here we are again. And today we will be discussing the topic of creating a human-centric hybrid work environment. So a very exciting topic, very a hot topic at the moment, because a lot of workspaces are moving from the remote work to the hybrid work. So let's hear the thoughts and knowledge of our panelists on this topic. I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping before we start, because we usually take a few minutes in the beginning just to give people some time to join in from wherever they are. So as I have mentioned earlier, this session is live streamed on LinkedIn and we are recording it as well. It will be available as a video on YouTube or as a podcast. As always, we are looking forward to your lively discussions in the chat. So please just make sure that if you are asking a question to any of our panelists, make sure to preface it with the word question. And in case you're targeting it to some of the panelists, write their name into the brackets so that it's easier for me to find those questions in the chat later on and ask them during our Q&A session. The whole panel discussion will take 2 hours, out of which 90 minutes are reserved for the panel discussion, and the last 30 minutes are reserved for a Q&A session with our amazing audience. In case we are having any participants joining us with hearing impairments, there is the option of a live transcript available on Zoom. However, screens tend to glitch a bit when you use it, so it is up to you. Yes, and now we're 6 minutes past 1. So I would just suggest that we start with a quick round of introductions. I'm going to start, and then I'm going to let our panelists to introduce themselves, and we're going to jump right into the questions. So hello, everyone. My name is Susanna Warden. I'm the moderator of this session, and I'm a project and research manager at Diversify. My professional background is in social work, inclusive development cooperation, and project management. And just to describe myself, in case we have any people joining us with visual impairments, I am a white female with long brown dreadlocks. I'm wearing a purple sweater, and I have a yellow background behind me with 2 flowers and a blank white board. So that's me, and I think we can have Chisom introduce herself next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am Nigerian and the founder of Diversify and Herspace. I'm also an economist and DEI practitioner, and super happy to be here with Norbert and Sumit. I am a Black woman, curly-ish black long hair pulled to the back, wearing a black turtleneck shirt and sitting against a off-whitish wall. So no flowers or plants behind me to keep anything interesting. So yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you so much for your introduction, Chisom. Next on my screen is Norbert. Can you introduce yourself briefly?
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Norbert Stuber. I am the head of talent, diversity, and inclusion here at Economist Group. I'm currently located in London in Cabot Square, which is one of our main offices here in London. I'm a Black male, dark skin, wearing a gray V-neck sweater with my red lanyard for my badge. And I'm in I have, I guess, a colorful virtual wall behind me with different squares representing sort of virtual or hybrid working, I think the illustration is. But I'm happy to be here on this discussion today with Chisholm and Sumit and Susanna, and I'm happy we can discuss and share some ideas and how we could go around helping each other within our organization regards to hybrid working.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Norbert. And the last one on my screen here is Sumit. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sumit. Sumit means everyone's friend, so I'm glad to make more friends today. I'm the head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in Schibsted. Schibsted works in 3 verticals, mainly in the Nordic countries, but also in Poland, and it's news media, online marketplaces, and financial services and ventures. I sit in Oslo. My background is I have an economy background. Been working on innovation and digitalization in my past jobs. But in my spare time, I've been working on the Norwegian Turban Day. We have a vision to make Norway the best country to be different in, and that's why you also see I have a turban and have a kind of a been very different in my upbringing in Norway, even though my roots are from India and my parents are born in India. So yeah, that's me, and I'm really looking forward to have a dialogue with you and learn more from you, Susanna, Chisholm, and Norbert.
Thank you so much. We are also definitely looking forward to hearing your thoughts and experiences. This is a very exciting panel for me because we have 3 DIB practitioners on the panel. So it's going to be a power panel for sure. And I can't wait to jump into the questions. So let's just do that now without further ado. The first question goes out to Chisholm. I feel like I'm moderating like the millionaire competition at the moment. You have to answer right to move on to the next question, Chisholm. But the question is, can you provide nuance about the hybrid workplace? What should we have in mind when we talk about this?
Okay, so the hybrid workplace is, I think, exactly how many people think of it now. You know, hybrid work refers to the spectrum of flexible work arrangements where an employee's work location or hours are not strictly standardized. So it's not necessarily the typical 9 to 5, or you don't have to sit at a physical office to get that done. You know, so usually, when we think about the physical workplace, it's mainly around going into a building, sitting at a desk, seeing your colleagues in person. But now we also have the digital workplace where you might be working from home, from your kitchen table, and having meetings with colleagues also who are in remote locations as well. And I think that the global COVID pandemic has forced us to reframe how we see the workplace. And it has also forced us to adapt to a new working status quo, hence the hybrid working environment. I would like to say, though, that, you know, as the world continues to open up and prepare for a post-COVID era, you know, most companies are returning to a physical workplace, and they really have to navigate the reality of people working from home or from the office. And we can't just go back to the previous normal. And this is where the challenge lies and where the inclusion work begins. So just to nuance this a bit, when we talk about the workplace, we often think about our own workplace, right? But we also have to think about other people's workplaces and how we interact with them. So if you think about a lot of societal structures, they're basically mostly people's workplaces. So hospitals, restaurants, grocery stores, digital meeting with potential clients or service providers, and people's homes are now workplaces. So we also have to look at equity, respect, and inclusive behavior, because they must also show up in how we interact, speak to colleagues, people, strangers, and also how they interact with us. I hope that provides a bit of a better nuance. Yeah.
Thank you. It definitely does. I mean, you know, when people hear the topic of our session for today, creating a human-centric hybrid environment, they might have different ideas of what a hybrid working environment might be. So thank you so much for creating some kind of base for us that we can build on. And I would like to ask Sumit, because we have so far unpacked the first part of it, so the hybrid work model, but let's zoom into the human-centric term. What comes up for you when you hear the term human-centric, and how does it fit the hybrid work model being created at Schibsted, for example?
Mm. Yeah, I think, yeah, first of all, working with diversity, inclusion, and belonging, I think when I'm very humble, and I kind of also afraid when I work with this, because, you tend to talk about it as if uh, diversity kind of as a one group. But I can talk as an experience of wearing a turban in Norway. I could talk about experience of being kind of having Indian roots, etc. Right? But I don't know how it is to be blind in the society. I don't know how it's to have a different sexual orientation or a different color, right? So that makes me very humble, and then I also need to learn about those perspectives. And the reason why I say that is that because that's where the human aspect actually comes into play. When we talk about the best companies are those that are customer centric. So they understand, they have a human kind of dimension in how they understand, get the insight, and actually delivers on the customers' pain gains and jobs to be done. And that's the same here. When we talk about the human-centric approach, do we understand each individual? Because it's not the numbers, it's not the big awards or kind of counting the genders. It's actually about one individual human being, and wearing a turban for me could be totally different for another individual. So how do you accommodate that human-centric understanding? So that's why I'm kind of afraid but also humble when I approach this. um, but what we can do, of course, is to kind of, I think what we've learned in the past kind of years with the COVID also hitting us, is the importance of that we are very different, and we also have different needs, and it's become very even more clear in the COVID kind of era. And that, what does that require from us? Even more understanding of the human needs. And I think where one dimension, like we've been the dimensions we've been focusing on has kind of expanded with COVID. So that means that the human kind of, our definition of the human is actually expanded, and that requires even more from the organization or the company and the leadership. um, because you're supposed to connect that individual, that human beings needs, to a structure in the company. Yeah, just a few reflections around that. I don't know if that answered your kind of your question, or if I should go on. I could go on for a few hours. I thought leave it by there.
Thank you. It was really beautifully put, not seeing human as the overall umbrella term or the diverse groups, but actually each individual in their uniqueness and the needs that they have. So thank you so much for this answer. So far it has been Norbert who hasn't joined my millionaire competition. So I have a question for you as well, Norbert. After the 2 years of a global pandemic, of working from home, many companies are gradually returning to the physical and traditional office space. Many companies had their share of challenges and learning in terms of remote work, and now they have to adapt once again to an inclusive hybrid work. So in moving from remote work to a hybrid model, what are some of the main challenges company leaders have to address? Oh, sorry, you are muted, Norbert.
Sorry, thank you. That's a great question. And sorry, I unmuted myself because I have a lot of my HR colleagues in the background making a lot of noise. So apologies if you should hear someone screaming and giggling. It's lunchtime here in London. Yeah, great question. Like most organizations in the UK and globally, we have our fair challenges regarding hybrid working here at the Economist Group. I think the challenges business leaders will face will differ based on the size of the organization and the industry. But I think if we were to pick or highlight three main challenges that we've encountered in some of my discussions I've had with peers across the UK within their organizations, I say the first one most organizations are having issues with. They haven't detailed. They don't have a detailed vision in place for hybrid working. And what does that look like? When you think of hybrid working, you think of models. So, for example, as Chisholm touched upon, you have the remote working. People people working from home, and then you have people going into the office, the physical office. So, if you think of a model, you can think of some employees being on site, that's in the office, and then you could also have some employees working totally remote. Then you could think of a second model where you have employees who are working for part of the week on site in the office, and for other employees who are working, I would say, for another part of the week remotely. Now, some organizations are thinking about either going fully remote or partially remote. I think one of the challenges is finding out what that detailed vision entails for each organization and finding the model that works best for you. Because then you have to think of the infrastructure, how you will set up your teams to be successful. Like Samit talked about, he touched upon thinking about colleagues who have a visual disability. So, if you're bringing them into the office, do you have the technology set up to help support them? If you're thinking about mothers who or carers who having someone to support, think about how they will the fear, the anxiety around coming into the office. And of course, COVID is still around. It's happening, it hasn't disappeared. If you think about my colleagues in India and in Hong Kong only just, I think, last week sent out a notice we were getting from an HR colleague that they're now going to allow flights to go into Hong Kong and people to leave and so forth. They're still under lockdown. Colleagues in India, Indian office, they haven't returned to the office yet. So people, when you think about creating a hybrid working environment, you have to start thinking about keeping COVID in mind. I think another challenge is when an organization fixed on what model they should fix on, you have to also think of the alignment. Is your model aligned with your top performing teams? Think of your sales teams, think of various teams within your organization. Make sure that model is aligned with them, that they're on board. You also, the other challenge is, how do you communicate this sort of vision that you have for the business going forward to the global company? Do you have everyone on board? I think as business leaders, you just can't sit there and think that, oh, we're just going to go back to office 3 days a week or 1 day a week without communicating that to the team, without asking people, are you comfortable doing this? People have been locked down for 2 years. A lot of mothers, a lot of colleagues became new mothers, and they have to care for the first time. And there's this disconnect. You have to think about how they will disconnect from their child and go back into the office and have to deal with possibly COVID outbreaks, being crammed up on trains and so forth. So you have to think, when you think of a model, those are the type of challenges I see business leaders having around. For example, according to a survey by McKinsey & Co., 68% of organizations don't even have a detailed plan in place or haven't even communicated. So think of how many businesses are still struggling to figure out where to go and what to do, and how that impacts, productivity, how that impacts their client base and the customers. I think another challenge that we are having here in the organization, here in the Economist Group, and some of my colleagues are having, is work-life balance. Work-life balance, thinking about how, when you're doing hybrid work, and where does work ends and where does personal life begins, and thinking about also that here in the UK, everyone, as you can see globally, every organization could measure that productivity went up. Why? Because you have people working additional times, extra times, because organizations haven't figured out the model yet. So they're leaving everyone to work on their own without saying, here are some steps and things you should do. But yeah, these are some of the challenges that we need to keep in mind, I would say burnout, work-life balance, and so forth and so on.
Thank you. Thank you for adding all these examples. And I just hope that if there are any leaders and representatives of those companies who haven't figured out their strategy for this model yet, they are really listening and taking notes. Hopefully this session will be helpful for them on the way forward. You know, in the month of March, everybody has discussed gender a lot with the International Women's Day on the 8th. Was it the 8th of March? I hope I'm right. Yes. So we have collectively discussed gender a lot this month. And I have a question for Chisom. You know, looking into intersectional gender and looking beyond the binary gender, which is very important, what are the challenges and opportunities of the hybrid work model when talking about different diversity parameters such as disability, age, race, or religion?
Thank you for that question. I would like to reflect on it from two perspectives. So from the Nordic perspective, and then perhaps from a global perspective. I think that from a Nordic perspective, you know, just to clarify that when oftentimes we discuss diversity and inclusion, it really just centers around binary gender, you know, so who's a cis man, who's a cis woman, you know, and intersectionality kind of just gets thrown out of the window. It's rarely considered, mentioned, or even included. So and also on the basis of said gender, it often includes white, middle class, and above men and women. You know, so from a Nordic perspective, DIB initiatives cannot necessarily be successful without addressing this constant oversight, right? We cannot properly reach an equal or equitable hybrid working model if we keep ignoring a large chunk of people, essentially, right? Because any initiatives we implement herein is kind of just like pouring water into a bottle or a can that is open on both ends. So basically it's a waste of time and money. But from a global perspective, I think we have to look at it. We have to look at challenges and opportunities that pertain to intersectional and inclusive gender assessment when we look at the hybrid workplace, right? And I don't think that I have enough time to unpack the challenges and opportunities, so I will just mention a few. So for challenges, research shows, for example, that when we're looking at a working from home setup, gender imbalance tends to show up, especially when children are present. So Norbert had just talked a lot about, you know, children and the experiences, you know, he's noticing of colleagues that are women who have kids, or even dads or non-binary people who have kids. And this is so because in most cases, when we're looking at a heterosexual family setup, women still carry a large brunt of childcare, and the importance of their work is often second to men, right? So research has been done that in situations, for example, where there's been limited space, men tended to have a room of their own or a desk to work, which serves as their office space from home, whereas women did not, right? So, but if we look at it from an opportunity, like from a perspective of what opportunities do we have, we see that flexible working environments has been really helpful in reducing long commutes, for example, and also in enabling, you know, employees or colleagues who are unwell or they have urgent caregiving responsibility at their home. It also saves you the time of showing up, you know, traveling for 30 minutes to show up for a meeting that you could have literally just had on Skype or Zoom, or is Skype still a thing? Yes, or on Zoom. I digress. Anyways, so the flexible working environment, you know, it has been shown to help improve employee productivity, and it also boosts morale. So just looking at, there are challenges and there are also opportunities. Like I talked earlier about an intersectional perspective. So herein we need to look at how do people who are from minoritized or marginalized groups, how do they feel about flexible working environments? Some studies have been conducted that shows that it has actually bolstered their mental health because it has reduced their exposure to microaggressions, for example. On the global scale, we see that we see on the global scale, and this is not in the Nordics, because I think the Nordics are a bit more open to, I mean, Nordics have been doing flexible work environments pre-COVID, right? So looking at it from the perspective of on a global scale, it is also possible that if you prefer to work from home or prefer a hybrid setup, people might receive that as not being committed to your job. And this is a challenge that as organizations, we also need to address. And lastly, just something I want to say here is that we know that flexible and hybrid work is here to stay, right? So there is an opportunity here for employers to continue to monitor the impact of hybrid work to ensure that women, people of color, junior staffs, basically everyone really has access to opportunities, right? Because there's this out of sight is out of mind mentality as well, where you have to see people to recognize them and promote them and, you know, give them a pay rise if they need to, right? And this can be further compounded by intersectionality. So it's a bit, there are benefits, there are challenges, and we kind of have to navigate those two things.
Thank you, Tisam. It sounds like a lot of work to me.
It is.
Yes, it just actually made me think of how when the pandemic started and a lot of work has moved to the remote workspace, a lot of people with disabilities have been saying how before that every employer was saying, no, sorry, it's not possible to work remotely, and all of a sudden it was very possible for everyone. So in a way, it has provided more opportunities for people with disabilities to gain employment. But my next question is for Sumit, because all this work that needs to be done, you know, who is responsible for that? So my question is, we know that where inclusion is concerned, a lot of responsibility falls to the direct report of an employee or line manager. We have talked to you about this briefly before, Sumit. And in some cases, this might actually absolve the line manager's leader or the company's leaders from any form of responsibility. So it's kind of all on the shoulders of the managers and the line managers. And while there is a lot that an individual can do to create an inclusive environment, responsibility should always rest on the leadership. So what can company leaders do to ensure that their inclusive and equitable culture is ingrained so much so that the line managers can have an enabling environment to further enable their teams?
Yeah, I think I totally agree. The kind of the leadership, kind of the top sets kind of the tone and are the role models of the company and the company culture. And then I think whether it's hybrid or not, but especially in the hybrid kind of context, what I think we probably see is the importance of the middle managers, the one you report to. I think this was a research done by Microsoft where they see kind of a hybrid paradox, where they see that, okay, that for some people working at home means working more productive, having work-life balance and being focused. For others, that means going to the office. So it's sort of totally contrast in kind of how humans perceive what it means to kind of deliver on these parameters and to feel included in the company. But what you see there is that what matters if whether you sit at home or you are in the office, how kind of closely linked or how on your manager is. That means not just being in a continuous kind of dialogue with regards to having a few meetings, being there, but also the correspondence in between the meetings. A middle manager really is kind of the key. And what you see there is that some people actually increase the kind of feeling of inclusion and belonging when the middle manager is or has inclusive traits or is actually on. So you actually raise that bar. It's kind of one, some research shows that. So that means that the middle managers really matters, but they need to be including in how they kind of operate. And what does that mean? Um, I think first of all, when, like I mentioned in the introduction as well, when you sit at home, you actually add one parameter more, or a working hybrid workplace, you add more complexity and parameters in the kind of equation in how it is to work. That means that the leadership or the middle manager needs to understand much more of the individual's needs. And that is kind of also what I think is the difference between kind of diversity management and kind of just management. That when the complexity increases, it means that you are challenged more. You need to be more listening. You need to be more curious. You need to kind of understand the other perspectives. And as a leader, that's your role, to set that kind of platform and space in order to kind of understand that those needs. So I think that's key. And then on adding up on that, I think there's also something around the company structures and processes and having the right tools, right? When we sit so much online, what kind of tools are we using? Do those tools accommodate different needs? Whether it's kind of sound or visual or being in different places. It could be, for instance, one example. Secondly, how do we set up kind of the digital also spaces for collaboration where you can spar? Do we have the ERGs or employee resource groups where you can actually have a dialogue and actually talk about this, because everyone is learning here. So how do you kind of move that needle? Yes, then you need to kind of collaborate and share those thoughts somewhere. That could be done digitally as well. And then the third element, I think also important, that when you then arrive at the office, you probably have a bit different needs because you might not come there every day. So how is the company space built upon around those different needs? For instance, in one of our offices here, what we have in same kind of floor, there's kind of a space where you aren't allowed to speak. It's totally quiet zone, and then you move a few meters, you can speak a bit but not loud. And then there's the third space where you can shout. And that's sort of how they built it around kind of different needs for people. And I think the need for that is even higher in these kind of that flexibility is even higher. And I don't think we know too little about it as well. So it's kind of meeting kind of our understanding and kind of developing as we move.
Thank you, Sumit. Those were some really amazing examples that you have provided, and it really made me think of how important it is to make people feel included within these hybrid workspaces, whether it is at home, online, or in the office. So maybe Norbert, could you reflect? What are some
if I may,
oh yeah, sure, please.
Just Sumit's examples also just reminded me of the importance of like policies, and even though like rules, even though it's not like, you know, hardcore, but just like this is a quiet zone, we don't do this, we don't speak here. I think the importance of policy and regulations, like behaviors that is expected of the group, I think that's also remarkable. So yeah, that's pretty amazing.
And it's so important in any work environment to have those kind of rules that set up the tone for the company. So Norbert, back to you. Could you please reflect on what are some of the challenges with inclusion in these kind of hybrid models? For example, when people work from home, they might feel disconnected from the team or the company and the company goals. So what can leadership do to prevent that?
That's a great question. How to start answering that? I would say that, you know, employees can easily become disconnected or disengaged with their organization, their teams, their people managers, as Chisholm just touched on, even processes, behaviors, the company culture as a whole, when it's not aligned with the core values of the organization. So you could have your company culture, and then you could have your values, but your values are not aligned with your culture. And that's what could bring about some disconnect. For example, if your organization, I would say, if your organization values are structured on openness, transparency, collaboration, but then communication from leaders is almost non-existent, or processes are not inclusive or equitable for all, or there's a lack of transparency on the business decision regarding employees, or the business deciding on creating its own vision of its culture without involving or considering employees' opinions, I think then employees can easily become disconnected. I think some of the things that leaders can do to prevent that, leaders can start something simple, start by building small, open, honest, and meaningful connection with their employees to help maintain their motivation and engagement with the company when, especially in working in a hybrid model. For example, here at the Economist Group, we have an event where we started with the executive leadership team, and every member on the executive leadership team have hosted an event called Have a Coffee with Me. And it's a virtual coffee chat where they share their own lived experience, their work history, family history, with everyone in the business, and it give up colleagues an opportunity to know a little bit more about their leaders, get more connected, see their leaders as human beings and not as some some statue above who just point fingers and give orders. There's also a model that we sort of I found in a McKinsey report, and I can share with everyone. We started to adapt it here with our first line managers, especially with managers who just became managers within the business and are still struggling in terms of managing people. And I will give you I'll give you the model, and then you can probably make what you want of it or take what you want from it. And the first part of the models talked about be kind. The second part talked about be thankful. And the third part talked about be positive. And the last one is be well. So it says be kind. Research shows that when employees perceive compassion or kindness from leaders, they become more loyal to them. Loyalty feeds better performance at work. Be thankful. Thanking team members routinely, frequently, generously, genuinely costs nothing and sets up a positive dynamic where everyone wants to do better. Be positive. Validating feelings without holding judgment, offering support, boosting motivation and increase an individual's sense of autonomy and self-competence, which in turn is directly linked to greater happiness and well-being. And the last one is be well. Managers who prioritize their own health care and well-being, including attention to their own diet and exercise and sleep, can better help others prioritize theirs. So if you think of that model and you have leaders who can apply that model, especially when you're a leader, you can't go telling someone, you need to log off, you need to get some rest, you need to go on a vacation when you are not doing it. You got to lead by example. Lived experience is important. So when we have that coffee discussion, people felt more connected. My CTO, and I, if she's going to see this recording, she wouldn't mind me sharing this. She shared her family experience where she talked about her daughter transitioning. And that was big news for the company. Everyone felt so connected. They found the human side to it, and they started to buy more to the notion of, I can listen to my leaders. I can be more motivated by them. And lastly, I would say one last thing before I finish is that, I like to say to my new managers here, leaders should start first prioritizing employees' well-being, mental health, job satisfaction, their development, work-life balance, benefits, compensation, giving employees or colleagues their voice and their own happiness, and considering their inclusion. And in that, you will get where, colleagues will feel more connected with the work culture and don't feel so disconnected. Yeah.
Thank you, Norbert. That was a lot of food for thought. It actually reminded me that we have this option of reactions on Zoom. People, please use them. If you want to show a heart, if you want to clap, use it. I have definitely clapped because I love those was it for values, for rules? Be kind, be thankful, be well. And the fourth one I missed.
Be positive.
Be positive. Yes.
And if I could add to this, Susanna, it kind of just reminded me of, when we work within our organizations, or when we even work with clients, like one of the things we do to combat microaggressions is using microaffirmation. Right? Microaffirmations are just like little things you can say, hey, Susanna, good job at that presentation today. Oh, your sweater looks really great. Those little things are a way to actually address directly or kind of like offset micro aggressions. And it's also a really good way to create a culture where people, celebrate each other, where people are thankful, where people notice and give credit for what somebody has done. So I definitely love that.
Yes, and talking about company culture, it is a key part of a working environment. And for the longest time, most of us have been used to fostering a certain type of company culture face to face. So Chisom, I have a question for you. What can companies do to introduce and maintain a healthy company culture when using the hybrid work model? I mean, Norbert has already mentioned a few examples, but can you add?
Yes, I think, Norbert and Sumit actually have talked, I've mentioned some really great options or suggestions. I think one thing that came up for me is also kind of what Norbert said, I think, in the beginning about, it depends on the type of work and the type of company. And I think that is imperative, because something works for company A doesn't mean it can work for company B, right? So it is important to find a system and a structure that works for your specific company, for the type of work that you do, and for your people, right? So just a quick report here by the Economist Group, part of their organization called the Economics Impact. They conducted a research on flexible working, and they actually found for a positive impact of flexible work on employees' physical, mental, social, and financial well-being. Based on the survey that he did, I think it was 72% of people felt that flexible work increased feelings of inclusion, as Sumit mentioned earlier. Nonetheless, it's also important to note that certain groups, such as older people, like older employees and frontline workers, they are more likely to be negatively affected with the flexible work arrangements, and they may find it harder to, say, collaborate in an era of flexible work and digitalization. So what can companies do? I think provide additional support for all employees and pay specific, attention to older employees from marginalized groups, employees with disability, right? Now that we're doing hybrid work, do they have the right computers? Do they have the right screens to actually make their work accessible for them? For new hires, Norbert, I think, might have mentioned this, or perhaps Sumit, remember, and I think for me in particular, I always kind of say that the work of retention begins the moment new hires sign the contract. Oftentimes, you woo them, they sign the contract, and you're on your own. However, onboarding should be an ongoing process, right? And there should be ongoing engagements that is inclusive, comprehensive, and of top-notch quality. Other things companies can do, I think, enable better processes for communication and collaboration. There really needs to be a strong focus on technology and accessibility for people, especially people with disabilities. And also ensuring that the workforce across all age groups is digitally fluent, right? You can't assume that, you figure Zoom out. Actually provide trainings for them for these multi-channel platforms that they use to communicate with everyone. Don't just assume that, Zoom, Teams. I mean, I struggle with Teams. Sorry if anyone here works for Teams, and I think I'm quite tech savvy to a point, so that's something we should keep in mind. And also a few other things I'd like to mention here is, understand that despite the benefits, the lack of human connection can also undermine trust and connectivity in the workplace, right? There is a significant, and research has found that there's a significant variance when it comes to feelings of equity and balance of power in the workplace. And this is in a negative way, especially within a flexible workplace environment. And lastly, I think it's important to foster a purpose-driven organization and build social capital. So as middle-level managers, as top-level managers, find ways to connect people with each other, not just only within the teams, but across the teams and business functions, engage in learning opportunities, create virtual hangouts. It's not the same as in person, but at least it's something to foster inclusion, and also continue to foster a culture of innovation. Just last thoughts here, it's really important that we remember that how employees feel reflects on your organization. So if somebody is depressed, if somebody is not thriving or doing well, it's not their problem, it's your organization's problem.
Thank you so much, Chisom. This was an answer packed with a lot of advice. I see Norbert
Totally
has
agree.
unmuted himself. Do you want to add something?
No, I said I totally agree with Chisom. That was very good. Yeah.
My mind is blown. I have to rewatch this and just write everything down. Thank you so much, Chisom. This has been really a great answer. And yeah, it just shows how many challenges there are, how much can be done. But if it's not, it can end up by companies losing employees. And this is what happened during the remote working period. A lot of companies have lost employees because they just didn't figure out how to do it right. So Sumit, I have a question for you. I feel like you have been a little bit silent for a while, so I would like to ask you, can you reflect on the relevance of equity? And how do you balance established work cultures, which ensure productivity, with having the flexibility to allow equitable treatment of employees?
Yeah, I think, or just to start with an example. So in my previous job, I remember when we started, kind of everyone had to sit at home, like 12th of March 2020. I remember I felt it really sucked to sit at home because I loved going to office, and I was sure that I wasn't able to work efficiently. But I actually worked much more efficiently. Like with somebody of you mentioned earlier, I didn't have to spend like 40 minutes morning and evening on the transport. And secondly, we got a kid a few months earlier, so I felt that I got kind of the paternity leave with my wife together right at home. So I was able to kind of work and have the lunch together. So I felt that, you often say, is the kid kind of linked much to the kind of mom or dad? Actually, there was no difference, because I think because I was at home, so both were at home, and we were able to kind of accommodate kind of our new needs as a family. But then when things opened up, I think they had done some research or had some hypothesis that people work much more inefficiently sitting at home. So before kind of the summer holidays, everyone were kind of ordered to come back to office. And that I felt really sucked again, because I had found kind of a new way of working, which really met my needs. And suddenly I got this order from top that, yeah, but now we return back because you don't work efficiently at home. And but that time I felt that was really much worse, because I felt that, but I've actually learned how to work from home. I actually felt much more a part of kind of meeting my flexibility in the company by sitting at home. So I found that really terrible, to be honest, to return back. And when we kind of had a few months more and then we had to return back to home, then I kind of had destroyed that routine again. So I was kind of there, kind of, I felt they lost me sort of, because it was sort of very, confusing for me. And that I think illustrates that the system wasn't accommodating my needs, right? I was accommodating the system's needs, and that was sort of troubling. And I think that illustrates also what's important with equity. We have different needs, right? If we are just got the kid, or we have some other abilities, or we, let's say we are fasting, or we want to sit home because we want to pray, right? There are different needs, and we have to accommodate for that. And it's extremely much more terrible or challenging when this kind of added parameter is a part of the equation, as I mentioned. But I also think there's a big opportunity here, and I think a lot of companies are actually grasping that opportunity. For instance, I just heard from the corridors a colleague of mine saying that, I don't have meetings in the mornings anymore. I come to office during lunch because I figured out that I love the mornings a bit calm. I work focused, and then I come to office and have my meetings here. I love that way of working. I don't think that would be possible to say 2 years ago. So I think there's a lot of learning happening, a lot of change happening, actually meeting the different needs. But then the system or the kind of company has to be also listening to those needs. And I think we are. So when we've kind of set up the hybrid working model, we are trying to listen. And we've also kind of said that you don't, what days would you like to come, right? It's kind of up to the individual to figure out that. I come to office every day now um, because we have just one working desk at home, and so my wife deserves that. But no, but I like working in the office, right? Because I like to talk a lot, so then I need people around me. But that's my need, and the system is kind of accommodating that. There's some people that aren't coming, or maybe just once a week or something, and the system is trying to accommodate that need as well. But I think we also have to kind of admit that we're learning. It's this a very premature kind of time, so we really need to be flexible as a company also to accommodate that flexibility. Just one thought, because we spoke about kind of uh, the work-life balance, and I think that's also kind of an important element. One research we were a part of, that actually was the result came a few weeks ago, showed that we are on the gender perspective. There's actually not in the Nordics, or there's not so much biases, or we don't feel the biases regarding genders. The ambition for men and women are similar. So the differences aren't that huge until you get a kid in the family. Then it kind of happens. And what are kind of the biggest things? Shiso mentioned already some of them, so I won't go into that. But one interesting finding is the work-life balance, is that it shows that some often there's a perception that the man's job is more important than the women's job. So that means that if you have tight deadlines, if you have to work overtime, because the job is like that, that actually eats your life balance. So the kind of conclusion is, if you don't have work-life balance, if the system or company doesn't accommodate, give you good work-life balance, it actually impacts the family structure negatively. And that impact most often the women more than the men. So that also illustrates the importance of different needs, but especially work-life balance and flexibility from a company perspective will, I think, make people quit their jobs less if the companies yeah, are able to actually put that structures in place.
Yes.
Susanna, can I also add something here quickly? Like I experienced this firsthand, but now it's in research, so I can talk about it. Because oftentimes when we think about women, who might, like, what might hinder, for example, a woman getting a job, you might think women with kids, because then you think that they have responsibility for those kids, and that is true. And there's also that situation where if you're a young woman who does not have kids yet, the possibility that you might get pregnant and need to take maternity leave, this is, like, it can become a constraint. And interesting enough, when I first moved to Norway, I had an interview at a great organization, well known, that I will not mention. And one of the questions the partners asked me was, oh, one of the questions was, you're young, do you have kids? And I said, is that a legal question to ask? And he responded, no, just trying to get to know each other. And I knew, like, I cringed, because I knew what the question was asking is, do I have kids, or am I a risk for, getting a job, getting pregnant, and then having to go on maternity leave? And the research and the data also captures that.
That is mind-blowing. Thank you for adding that to some, and thank you so much for your answers, Sumit. It really made me think of how, the companies have to practice what they preach. If they are talking about flexible working hours or working environment, the company has to be flexible itself to accommodate that. And you have talked a lot about the responsibility of on the shoulders of managers. So I have a question for Norbert, because in a big company such as the Economist Group with more than 1,500 employees, how do you get all managers who are responsible for daily interactions with their hybrid team on board with your DEIB initiatives?
Great question. And there's a reason for me laughing, because I think for every D&I practitioner in every organization who's really serious about D&I will find what I call progress blockers. Those type of managers who tend to work with hidden processes in the background. They tend to change the processes and do their own thing and cause damage to the organization culture as a whole. Yes, so those blockers exist in our organization, like every other organization. We're not exempt from that. I think the first thing you have to do as a D&I practitioner to get those blockers or those managers who question the need for diversity and inclusion, I think you need to lead with data. You need to convince them. You need, and I think data is where it's at. I think if you highlight your strategy and then you're going with data, such as whether gender pay gap is a part of your strategy, which it is for us at Economist, ethnicity pay gap, gender balance, minority balance, employee satisfaction of work culture, employees' perception of their own managers. These things, when you lead with that data, I think you can convince any manager to say, okay, this is what the data is saying, because at Economist Group, we're working with some very highly intelligent folks. So you have to stand on your own 2 feet. Your ground has to be solid when you're going to convince them. So I think also a key thing that other colleagues could use in their own organization is, and I found this in many research and it's been discussed over and over by other practitioners, is communicate to those hiring managers, people managers, what D&I initiatives, what is in it for them? What are their return on their own investment if they should implement these initiatives? And I think when they see that, you will get that support, because sometimes some of the questions I get here is, like one manager, he was trying to be a bit sneaky. He asked me, so why are we putting so much emphasis on gender? And he could see that it bothers him. So I will say, I jokingly told him that, we have too many men in the organization, and we can't all go to the boys' club. We need a bit of balance. And it's important we have intelligent female colleagues around the world who want to come and work for us. So we want a different perspective. We want different, point of view, different lens and how we do things. And basically you have to convince people, some managers, longer than you expect to. But I think the one thing you should do is always go with your data. your data, make sure you have your strategy and your objectives, and lead with your data. And that will convince anyone that, hey, research say productivity went up, research say this went up. These are the reasons why D&I initiatives are important to us as a business in terms going forward into 2023. So I think, yeah, my answer with that would be lean on data. The last thing I would touch on that quickly is that one of the things that we did as an organization, and I have a few other organizations asking me how we did it, but I'm not going to share that secret, is that we've tied our D&I targets to managers' bonus. So think about that one. So if you're going to push back on D&I initiatives, well, it's going to cost you in the pocket. If we're trying to build inclusive teams, we're trying to build diverse teams, we're trying to make everything equitable for everyone, create equal opportunities, and you're going against that, well, then somebody have to pay the piper. It's going to be you. So but it is taken with some positive effects. So we can see we could have some measurable things that by making such a strong stand on D&I initiatives. I could see a lot of the managers buy into it, and the ones who are still on the sideline, they're being convinced with the data. So lead with your data.
If I could add just here, I think there's something brilliant. Everyone who knows me knows I love data. I like KPIs. I like things you can measure and you can attach, and even things you can't measure, come to me, I can measure it, but anyways, like all jokes aside, I think there's something beautiful about KPIs and then holding people accountable to those KPIs. And of course, money is a good motivator. So I think it's really brilliant to make it an organizational process. So it's not just a nice to have, of course, you're not punished if you don't get it right, but you're not necessarily rewarded either.
Yes. I did think that Chisom would want to add something, because when we talk about data, Chisom always has something to add. So yes, that's such an effective way to get people on board with data and with bonuses. So that sounds like a really good strategy. And
it's sad. I think there's a bit of this part of me that's quite sad that this is where we're at, but it's what it is. But yeah.
No, but if you think about it, I just want to touch this. And if you think about it, when you go into the data and the research, if productivity went up and innovation went up in an organization because of diversity and inclusion, so the company bottom line has increased, because you can go in many organizations who've done survey. A lot of the big organizations who has diversity and inclusion really well within the organization, and talks about the productivity, the bottom line is increased. So companies making money because they're getting it right off of D&I initiatives. So you go back to those managers and say, hey, you want a bigger bonus? Well, we're not selling our products really well. Because clients are complaining that they're a bit stale. And if you think about it, here at Economist Group, every time we do like a major deal with another client, a lot of them are asking us about our D&I initiatives. So those same managers come back to me and say, oh, I'm about to sign a contract with the client. It's asking about our D&I. I'm like, oh, remember the same initiative that you ignored? Yeah, so they can see that not just within the organization, but externally of the business, it is something taken serious. So yeah, there we go.
Yes. Thank you so much. I also see that Kasha in the comments has mentioned that they link HSSE, which is connected to safety. They link that those targets into bonus. So why not diversity and inclusion targets? So yes, thank you, Kasha, for adding that. And I definitely want to encourage everyone to write in their thoughts if any of our panelists trigger something within you, any opinions, thoughts that you would like to share, please write it in the chat. And also we encourage questions. We have around 24 minutes left of this session until we get to the Q&A part, but please feel free to already ask those questions if anything comes up for you while we are talking to the panelists. And my next question is for Chisom. So Chisom, you have lived in the US, in Nigeria, in UK, in Netherlands, and now you live in Norway, and you still work with companies around the world within all different countries. So what do you think can the rest of the world learn from the Nordic countries when it comes to the hybrid work setup, and vice versa? What can Norway and the Nordic countries learn from the rest of the world?
Good question. Thank you. The first thing, strangely enough, that came up for me, because, I've had a few conversations with Sumit and, and even in preparing for this panel. And one of the things that I thought was actually really great was his experience so far working in his role within DEIB. Whereas when I talk to a lot of people, it's always that, oh my gosh, and Sumit is always like, the organization is ready for it. And, he feels enabled. And I think that perhaps for Norwegian or Nordic companies, that there are a lot of companies that don't even have DEIB on their agenda in the Nordics, but I think that for companies that do, what I do get from DEIB practitioners is this kind of feeling that Sumit also passes off as he has in Schibsted. So I think perhaps there's a lot, of course, that we can unpack and, that the Nordics do in general, but the things that come up for me, I think that work-life balance, Sumit and Norbert talked about it. I think that the Nordics have a relatively stellar work-life balance. It is not only appreciated, it's practically enforced in many cases. Pre-pandemic, before flexible work was a thing, Norwegian companies, and I also assume the rest of the Nordics, have been excelling when it came to that flexibility. You're not expected to work yourself into the ground. It's absolutely okay to leave work early, and you don't have to make up an excuse. Your cat does not have to die, if you need to leave. And I think that this is super healthy, on the basis of even say parental leave. In Norway, and I know some other Nordic countries have maybe a longer parental leave, but in Norway alone, you have 12 months, which you can share equally between both partners. At the very least, the men must take 15 weeks off. And then there's that 2 weeks in the beginning as well. And this is all fully paid for, right? And this was very impactful for me because I had my first kid and my only kid in 2019. And my sister is based in the US, works for a great company. My sister and I gave birth within a month difference of each other. And she was back in work after a few weeks. And I was just lounging, and I had, like a year, I went hiking, I went shopping, and she just couldn't understand how I was being paid to be home and care for myself and my child. And I think the Nordics, there's so much the rest of the world, the US, the UK, and even Nigeria can learn from the Nordics. And then, Sumit talked about gender equality. I think gender equality and representation of the binary gender is very visible. And I think that this is something that the rest of the world can also learn from the Nordics. It is great when I see, 5 men and 5 women represented. And sometimes it's actually that equal. Sometimes it's 6 women and 4 men equally represented in companies. And I think that's beautiful. So that's on one hand. And then what can Norway learn from the rest of the world? I think also on the basis of gender, Norway does really well, like I said before, when it comes to cis men and cis women. And this is usually restricted to like people who are kind of wealthy and people who are white, and it's not very intersectional. So I think that the Nordics can learn from including people across diverse backgrounds and intersectionality in the workplace, as you can see in the US and the UK. So if you think about data collection, what gets measured gets done. Companies in the US and the UK can easily set KPI and collect data to measure what they are doing, whereas in the Nordics, the capacity is limited because policy and rules does not actually allow companies to collect things outside of gender and 2 other parameters, right? And I think that in some sense, this also facilitates inaction and performative work because it's not being measured, right? And so this is something that the Nordics can learn from the rest of the world, but we also need the policymakers, on the table for this. It's not just up to the companies alone. And lastly, I think the Nordics can learn from the rest of the world the power of naming and speaking about things as they are, right? Many of us can attest to not liking uncomfortable situations or conversations, right? But in my opinion, there seems to be a collective state of ignorance in the Nordics, you know, kind of if I don't address it, it will disappear, right? But it doesn't. So I think that whereas in the US and the UK, these conversations are often in the public and workplace discourse and agenda. And I can't say that it's better in the US or in the UK, but at least conversations are being had. And the first step to solving a problem is admitting that it exists. So there's much we can learn from them and a lot they can learn from us.
Thank you for sharing your experiences, Chisom. So my next question is for both Norbert and Sumit, and you have both actually already kind of answered this question. So maybe you just have something to add, because my question is, what are the specific measures your company is putting in place to ensure that the hybrid work model works for all? So Sumit, you have talked about like the different kinds of silent rooms and rooms where people can speak, and Norbert has been mentioning the four values: be kind, be positive, and be thankful. One more, I will make sure to remember that. But do you have any other examples of measures that your companies are putting in place that you would like to share with us, Sumit and Norbert?
So who should go first?
You go first.
Okay, I'll make it quick since it's a question for both of us. I'll touch on lightly touch on six things. One, inclusive communication. You know, our leaders are being more open and transparent with our colleagues, seeking their opinion and advice on business decision that affects everyone. We're doing this. We do this through group sessions, surveys. We use our Pecan scores to way of communicating to our colleagues. So we get from the masses. So we include colleagues in India, we include colleagues in other parts of Asia and in America and in UK. And I think this is one of the things you need to be mindful when you're a global organization, because you know, colleagues who are in other regions and our local office they disappear in the background. And only where the main hub is, it becomes existent in terms of hearing from those colleagues' voices, because things that matters to our colleagues in India is different to us here in the UK. So we have to consider them in order to have more inclusive sort of whatever decision we are making as a business. The other thing I would say, training managers. Manager skills needs to be updated. Remember, pre-COVID, we were talking different types of skills for managers. Now we're talking hybrid working. So we've seen soft skills as a key way to help managers cope or help managers best support their colleagues. Soft skills around such as active listening, you know, being able to give quality feedbacks, receive quality feedbacks. That's the other thing. Remember, managers love to tell you when you're not doing great, or great managers tell you when you're doing great. But it's important as well that sort of feedback is reciprocal. You know, it goes both ways. That helps to improve, because I like to tell my manager, this is how I like to be managed, and this is, you know, I didn't like the way you communicate XYZ to me. So improving our people skills for our managers. I think we also enforce that our managers do meet up with their team members once a week to have quality one-to-ones, and make it less business oriented and focus more on the relationship building aspect. The other one I would love to touch about a little bit is our HR business partners, or in some organization, HR operations. We encourage our HR BPs to, you know, have meetings with managers to encourage colleagues to take holidays. Because if you think about from 2020, it was lockdown, no one was going anywhere. So a lot of people were continuously working, and all the holidays were building up. And this leads to burnout, people getting stressed, mental health cases are going up and so forth. So we use that to encourage. We have something we implement here on a Wednesday, just like today, where there is no, there are no meetings from 9 a.m. in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. We talk about looking at our processes as well to make them more inclusive, more equitable. And the last thing I will touch on, how do we support our employees in a hybrid working? Look at the skills, do a sort of skill gap analysis, and make sure that your employees have the right skills to be able to function really effective in a hybrid working model. Those are the things I really want to touch on quickly.
Thank you so much, Norbert. I actually made notes, which I have just copy pasted into the chat. Sumit, what about you?
Yeah, great. And really good things you're doing, Norbert. So great to hear. I think most of the things I've already kind of mentioned, but what we're working on, just high level, we've established diversity, inclusion, and belonging as an area. We've established well-being as an area. So now we have a head of well-being, we have a head of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. Sort of that sets kind of a starting point also for accommodating different needs and really focusing on the human aspect in the company. Have you nailed it all? Not at all. Are we trying to figure it out? Yes. And are the top management listening? Yes. So I think that's where we are with regards to kind of the high level things. Then what we're focusing on is, as also Norbert said, training, inclusive training, or especially for the management. What's the inclusive traits? How do you actually use those behavioral strategies? How do you kind of, if you have unconscious bias training, how do you actually use that in the working space? If you're supposed to be curious, what does it actually mean to be curious in a meeting, or what does it mean to be curious in the elevator? So those kind of trainings modules we're in the making of. And also the training for kind of lifting the awareness in the organization, I think is really key also for it's not just about the management or the leaders, but also kind of the everyday, the colleagues. How are they onboarded? So we're making also our calendar with events and awareness and knowledge campaigns to really lift the whole organization with regards to that. Then I think it's kind of the more ongoing things is how we look at the processes. For instance, the employee life cycle, we're looking at that with a DIB filter, right? And what does that mean? Yeah, that means that how does also the hybrid model actually work in looking at the employee life cycle? Is it okay to ask if you're pregnant or are you going to have a kid? No. Are we putting that clearly in the policy? Are we following up that? Are the managers or people actually interviewing aware of that? So ensuring all those basics also will be key. And then on the data, I just want to mention that since you spoke about the data part, we have a lot of DIB questions, also meeting kind of the also how it is meeting different needs in our survey. So we ask all employees give us feedback on this, so that we can ensure that we're doing the right stuff. And also speaking of data, you spoke about what measures get done, and we actually experienced that, because in 2017 we were kind of in we got a lot of kind of attention, negative attention, both internally, externally, due to gender balance. So in 2017 December, the board set a target that we should be at least 40-60 balance, no matter kind of what gender, on all 3 top levels of the leadership. So in 2020, that target was reached. And I think it was reached. One of the reasons is because it was part of the bonus and KPIs on how the leadership was actually measured. So one of the challenge, of course, is like Shisun mentioned, what can we actually measure now, right? It's difficult when you can't actually measure the different parameters. So then it's really important to measure inclusion and sense of belonging, and
Yes.
really focus on the people we already have, what the knowledge we already have. Are we utilizing that, and are they feeling a sense of inclusion, those that are a part of the organization? So yeah, I'll stop there, but some of the things at least.
Thank you. That was an amazing list of things that I'm again copy pasting into the chat. And congratulations to Schibsted. May you keep on rising. When you set your targets, may you always accomplish them. That's really great to hear that it actually worked and that the work has been done. So we are almost at the end of the panel discussion part. In here we have 7 minutes left. Just to mention quickly, Emma has commented when you talked to me, because she was struggling with the term soft skills, because they're spun in a way that undermines how important they actually are. Because when we're talking about the hard skills, it sounds more concrete, technical, trainable, while the soft skills probably sound a bit more mushy and vague. So we might be in need of cleverer ways of assessing and measuring these so-called soft skills. So thank you so much for adding that, Emma. We have to bring you on a panel, actually, Emma. You have to join one of our panels, but that's for next time. So now my question is for Chisom before our time runs out. Chisom, as we have never worked in such a hybrid way as we are now globally, many companies are in the process of collecting data about people's experience of hybrid work. Now we're getting back into the data talks. So we know the economist within you loves numbers. So what should we be looking for within the data when talking about the hybrid environment to ensure that these hybrid working environments are designed with human needs in mind?
Absolutely. Good question. Great question, because I love this type of questions. So I'm trying to reflect on this from a Nordic perspective, also knowing that, what of our audience is Nordic, what we cannot collect in demographic information because we are restricted by this law. We can think about how can we measure inclusion, as Sumit said, right? How do we measure belonging? So if I look at this from like a couple of layers. So first, looking at it from a leadership effectiveness layer, right? Basically, what you want to look at there is, are your messages having the desired impact? These are things that can be measured. You can look into how interested your employees feel about the company, or how interested they are in switching roles, maybe moving to another position within the company or jumping ship altogether. How do they feel about their manager? How do they feel? Like, how often do they receive meaningful performance feedback? And do they get the support and the resources that they need to actually successfully do their work? So that's one layer. If you look at it from the layer of employee behavior and engagement, like through that, like metrics, here you essentially kind of want to assess how effective collaboration is between and within teams, like what is the progress on cross-functional projects and the meeting of, say, specific milestones? How well are they doing? You can also look at it from the aspect of, say, engagement in well-being offers. So for example, if you're running things around mental health or exercise, how many people are actually jumping on it? How many people are utilizing those services? How many people are leveraging the offers that you're giving them? Because it might tell you whether these offers are meaningful or if they are actually accessible to people. So if you look at it from a third lens, where we're looking at early outcomes and metrics, how often or what is the adoption rate for, say, productivity tools, right? What about participation in development opportunities? Like, how many of them jump on opportunities to improve themselves, learn something about the company, become mentors for others within the organization? Also look at issue resolution. When there is conflict, how do they handle it? How is it dealt with? Oh my gosh, something is ringing. Anyways, and also if you look at also distribution of promotion and raises, right? How many people are getting and receiving raises or being promoted, because this is also the out of mind is out of sight is out of mind philosophy. And of course, well-being, which Sumit talked about. Basically, this one is a bit more difficult to gauge, but you kind of have to try a bunch of engagement surveys to see how people are actually doing. And just the fourth layer that I will talk about is basically just results that are based on impact metrics. So here you just have to continually track and monitor your typical organizational, performance measures, right? Productivity, revenue, employee retention, how many people are leaving, how many people are absent, how many people engage in meetings when it's virtual. I mean, understand that sometimes people, don't have to show up on screen, but that could also indicate something, right? Also look at profitability. So these are things that you can continue to measure. So while you cannot ask them specific thing about demographic information in the Nordics, you can absolutely measure inclusion on a basis of what you see happening and also receiving feedback.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Chisom. I would love to listen to you more and give you more space for this answer, but the time is running for us. We only have 2 minutes left and we are getting to our favorite last question of our panel discussions. Even though this whole panel discussion has been extremely practical and you have all given so many tips and tricks on how to actually make this work. So I'm just going to ask you all to mention one top tip on what to prioritize when designing and implementing a hybrid work setup in terms of the EIB. What should be the one priority that the leaders should have in mind? And maybe we can start with Sumit.
One top tips. Maybe I think the focus on the competence. I think the leadership or middle managers' competence is the key here. So, but don't start with fixing everything. If they only could be curious, I think a lot you could learn a lot. So maybe that could be maybe a good start, which isn't that difficult. Like getting the data is more challenging, but starting with some traits or inclusive traits could be a good thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. So prioritizing training the line managers and the managers. That's a great first step to take. What about you, Norbert? What would you prioritize?
I say for every organization, I would say communication. Communicate with your people first, because whatever model you implement will affect them. Communicate, get their buy-in, get their opinions, because you want to make it inclusive. Because think of, we may have some colleagues, when you create such a hybrid model, you think of, colleagues who are underrepresented, they may be even more affected by it if it's not working for them. So I think communication should start, get their buy-in, and then you will be able to adopt the right model that works for the organization, and you, in turn, it will be effective. So start with communication.
Thank you, Norbert. And Chisom as the last one to answer.
I think anyone who attends like our monthly sessions probably knows my answer, and it's basically who's in the room? Who's in the room when those initiatives are being designed in the first place? Is everyone in your organization seen and represented in those plans? Because it's easy to meet out a plan and then try to implement it and then realize that, oh, I've forgotten about that person and that person and that person. So I think for me, it's always important to look at who is in the room just from the onset when those systems and structures are being designed. Make sure that around that table, it's inclusive, because that is how you will mitigate potential mistakes, or at least reduce possibility for mistakes and its exclusion moving forward. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Chisom, Norbert, Sumit. These have been some amazing answers, a lot of food for thought, a lot of great experiences and tips that you have all shared with us. I wish I had the melody from the competition, If You Want to Be a Millionaire, because all of you are millionaires now. I loved all your answers. You are all winners here. And I am glad to now move on to the Q&A session with our audience. So everybody, please, please, please feel free to throw in any questions that you may have. If you would like to target any of the panelists specifically, just write their name into brackets. And some of you have already been throwing in some questions as our panelists have been speaking. So I'm just gonna go through the questions and start asking. The very first question we got was from Kasha, and I think that she actually got all the answers she needed, because she asked how to practice inclusion in practice, hands-on examples for organizational leaders. I think we have heard a lot of that today, a lot of practical tips on how to practice inclusion in companies. So I think we can move on to the next.
I wonder if there's something that also can be added here, also just from a Nordic perspective, because it's something that I think we can continually learn, right? So my experience, I mean, there are a number of Nordic companies I work with now, but a lot of my clients are still US, UK, Europe, Africa based, right? And their diversity is different. Conversations around this are different. So I'd be keen to also hear if Sumit has anything specific to add with regards to, say, Norway, because I think this person is probably in Norway or somewhere in the Nordics. Sorry to throw you out like that, Sumit.
No, but that's really good. I think just a few reflections of when I started. So I've been working in Nordic companies most of my life, and interestingly, when we talk about Scandinavians, we tend to think that that's kind of one similar group, but very interestingly is that when I've been in the kind of 3 different companies now in the Nordics, before I remember I was taught that, when we worked in Telenor, I thought the Swedes are like, the Telenor Swedes are like this, or the Danes in Telenor are like that. Right? That I kind of putting, of course, some stereotyping around them. But then I've just figured out that that's kind of my kind of stamp of those different groups have been similar in all the companies. So it wasn't just Telenor Sweden, that was kind of, there was something different between the Norwegians and the Swedes. So I think that's, often I think we tend to think like, okay, the differences are just between kind of being in Norwegian versus being sort of from India, but the differences amongst the Scandinavian countries is huge. And then we zoom in again. I remember that I love to take sauna, so I often go to the gym, but I don't go to the gym. I actually just go to the sauna because I love that heat. And then when I sit in the sauna, I don't have a turban, but I have a long hair, long beard, and often I think people are afraid of asking me things, so they see a totally different person and they probably think it's a bit interesting and different because I grew up been staring down, right? Everyone stared at me because I was different, but nobody asks me something. And when I get the question, it's often 10 sorries if I insult you or I ask something wrong. What's actually on your head, right? But then in the sauna, nobody asked me a question until I met one from North Norway, a guy in the sauna, and he was like, hey, he was like, what the fuck is on your head? He was very direct. And that just zooming in, I'm just trying to zoom in the country, the differences amongst the people in Norway. It's a huge difference being from the city of Oslo versus being from the north. And being in Oslo, in the capital, being from the west versus being in the east. Where we see a trend that in the kind of communication field, in the media field, in a lot of fields, most people live in the central towards the west, in the less multicultural areas. How will we then have insight, understanding of the multicultural people or that segments in the society when we don't live there, or having insight about the habits or attitudes of people from the north? So I'm just trying to look at the complexity of the differences here. So if you're going to lead in this, you need to kind of understand that your perception of the world, your perception of values might not be the only truth. So if you're open with that, when you go into a new setting, if you're like, you just said, who's in the room? When you go in the room and you say, you know, there's probably 10 views of the world there. There are 10 difference, and those 10s are probably right. If you have that attitude and that openness, I think that's an inclusive trait that can be very powerful for you. A long answer, sorry, Shizam.
No, I love that. And I think there's something about also sharing experiences that also makes it real, because I saw you in that sauna, right? Without your turban. And I think that also creates a picture, and it also, for me, provides insight. Like lately, I've been learning a lot about the differences between the Nordic countries, but it also provides that additional insights from your perspective, who've lived here much longer than I have. So thank you for that.
Yes. Can you hear me? I just dropped off for a bit. Sorry, technical issues. My laptop wants to die very soon. But I have another question here. It is from Nikki, and it's a question relating to human centrism. So Nikki says, I often hear DEIB practitioners say that DEIB work is not personal, which I understand with regards to working with company culture, etc. But on the other hand, a lot of issues can be personal, especially with regards to discrimination that is based on identity. Question is, how do you communicate the non-personal approach when people do feel personally impacted? Who would like to tackle this one? Everybody's smiling.
I'm thinking. Can you maybe summarize the question again? Just because I'm still trying to understand the question.
So how do you communicate the non-personal approach when people do feel personally impacted in terms? Nikki, would you like to maybe rephrase or explain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess Chisholm, you've said it, that DIB work isn't personal, but I feel like so often it can be because we're talking, especially, I don't know, discrimination based on your identity. That's your personal identity, and then how to like communicate that it's not about people individually when we are working with like company culture. Does that help?
Yeah. So if I could, I'd love to hear from both Norbert and Sumit. So I guess when I say like DIB work is not personal, I think in communicating the importance of it, I think for me, especially as a Black woman doing this work, it is very important that I remove my emotions from it. It is very important that I don't take it personally, because there are a lot of things that I could take personally. So it's that constant decision that I have to make when someone says something or fires a microaggression my way to go to some, this is not about you. This is not personal. What is the work? What is the learning? What is the lesson here, right? So for me, it's very important to detach myself, but of course it does affect me. Sometimes you've seen me, I leave these sessions and I'm just like, you know, and it's hard. But in doing that work, I think it's important to identify that, okay, somebody usually when it's something that affects or reflects on your identity or affects you personally, I think another way to reframe that, for me at least, is to say, okay, now imagine other people in your workplace who have these identities. How would they feel? And this is oftentimes, you know, when you face microaggressions, say in the workplace, or discrimination in the workplace, they're often not intentional. They're often unconscious. And this is a part of the culture that we're trying to fix. This is the awareness that we're trying to make, is how can we collectively meet in the middle and learn from each other's experiences. So I'm going to stop talking here. I just wanted to nuance just the personal part of it, like I normally say, and then I'd love to hear from Sumit and Norbert.
I would just say I agree with you. You definitely have to put your own personal emotions aside in order to get things moving. Like I said, the progressive blockers that you're going to encounter, who are going to ask you silly questions, who could really drive you up the wall like Michael Jackson moonwalking, and then you might just want to just lose it, because when when you're seeing how society is reacting to these changes, but then you have individuals who sometimes can ask you questions that could really irritate you or do things. I think you then have to, you know, remove self. For me, I am passionate about people. I see the intersectionality I shared with my colleagues within the organization. For example, I have colleagues who in the LGBTQ plus community, I have friends who are dear to me. You know, I am a cis male. I don't have to be a gay male to identify with the human emotions and the rights that a gay male deserve. You know, they deserve to love as much as I deserve to love. So I see myself, if I want to be treated fairly, I want to have equity and equality in everything I do. The same must be able to be allocated to them themselves. So this fight is not just for me; it's for everyone. So I am, you know, I see, like I told Chisholm, I don't know if I remember I told you this, but I was in a CIPD conference, and I was speaking to the global head for the NHS, which is our national health service here, and he said, what do you think it all went wrong? And I said, I think, and why is there's a need for diversity and inclusion? Now I said, we always had a need for it. I think there's just over, you know, the people who consider themselves the human resources practitioners have forgotten about the words. It says human resources. I am a practitioner, so I'm here to, you know, gather the resources for the masses of the organization and make them available. So taking yourself out of it is not what is in it for me, is what is in it for the people I'm here to support and serve.
Sumit?
Yeah, maybe really support and echo what you two have said, and just to build upon that, I think, first of all, I think it's for me totally impossible to not take it personal or work with it personal, because it's about, just to take an example, if we work on inclusion, I can talk about how it feels to be excluded. I think most of us can, right? That's personal. I have an inner experience and feeling and perception of the fact of being excluded, and that's why I think I value inclusion. And I think that's kind of the personal part here. But when I build the things in Schibsted, I have to put that emotions aside to also build upon for everyone. And what does that mean? Again, to what you said, I love that. Who's in the room? Who's in the company? Do you challenge your inner circle and ask them about to understand their needs when you build it up? And or do you challenge kind of your perceptions of it to kind of understand them when you build it up? I think kind of you have to kind of just to share an example, one of my friends, so obviously I'm religious, I have turban, and I'm a Sikh. One of my friends, he hates religion. He kind of he can't take like whenever we have a dinner, we just fight because he's kind of anti-religion and I'm pro-religion. But you know, with the conversations with him, I also understand, because I've been curious and been listening, I think I understand his perspectives, even though we don't agree, but I understand him. And that's why I think he comes to the Turban Day every year. He's made the Turban Day logo, but he hates religion. So it's about, it comes from my inner kind of personal experiences, but you can't make a good product if you don't listen to the receiver. And the receiver is a kind of those that are in the room. It can be the top management, it can be the organization. You have to go out and listen and pack it so that it actually fits that that you have the product market fit in the organization.
Thank you all.
Can I quickly add to that, just short thing? I just wanted to say that one of the things that comes up for me, you know, when listening to Norbert and also Sumit here, is the importance, and this is something I believe, like when you're a DEI practitioner, you can't just have one aim. Like it's easy for me to be like, Black woman or woman, right? But you have to show up for everybody. That same energy you used to show up for gender equality, show up for transgender people, show up for gay people, show up for Muslims, show up for disabled people. So that energy needs to be the same for everyone across the diversity parameter. Just wanted to point that.
Thank you for adding that. That was powerful. So we do have 13 minutes left. So let's try to be quicker on the questions from the audience, if possible. We did have a question from Nikki, who was elaborating on what Norbert was talking about the progress blockers in the companies. And Norbert mentioned leading with data, trying to motivate people with bonuses. But Nikki has heard that there is also a case for using storytelling, because she heard from some consultants that data on its own may not bring the message home and doesn't really make it real. So have you ever heard of using storytelling to kind of bring the progress blockers on your side? Anybody?
Yes, I think it's very important, which is why, so for example, Susanna knows of some of our workshops, we try to make it as experiential as possible. It's easier to show people, it's easy to show people data, right? And say, according to this data, according to that, but until people actually feel something. And it doesn't mean that if you're talking about, for example, sexism, you don't have to create a sexist situation. Or if you're talking about anti-racism, you don't have to create that situation, but you can maybe connect it to bullying when you were a kid and you didn't have the power to say something. And I think that, so I don't think it's one or the other. I think data is powerful because at the end of the day, when you're talking to companies, they understand the numbers. But if you're trying to impact a behavior, change behavior, or grow a culture, then it's a combination of a series of things, not just the experiential trainings or the storytelling or the data. It's everything you can use to fit that particular company.
Thank you, Chisom. Sumit?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I love your answer, System. I think actually I'm in a dilemma here, to be honest, because I think it's a balance between the rational and the emotional. So you have to balance the brain and the heart in this, right? So where is the right balance? Because we are different. So some people love the kind of rational part. I think a lot actually. May have want the kind of rational story, the data, while a lot of us would like the more emotional part, right? So how do you balance that? And that's just support what you say, System. You need both, right? But I think it's difficult. To where do you put? Is it most focused on data or the rational storytelling or the more emotional storytelling? Where do you kind of put that draw that line? I think that's actually difficult because some people, the people that might be against this, would like to get earlier to the point, right? So hey, cut the crap, just get to the point. So can you then what I've been asking myself, could I get faster to the point but have an emotional touch of it? Maybe, I don't know. I've been discussing this a lot with several where they say, I'm so rational driven. But when I heard those inspirational stories, that blown me away. That what when I got the buy-in, right? So it's difficult to say, kind of the one or the other one. But I think balancing is the key.
Thank you both for answering the question for Nikki. We do have a question here that I would like to actually ask Norbert. So Norbert, many new employees who have been hired and onboarded remotely during pandemic will or already are now coming into the office for the first time. How can companies ease the transition?
That's a very good question. I think for us, and like I said before, in everything that I've said before, it varies from organization to organization. You have to find what works best for you and for the colleagues you serve. I think for us, there's a one way. If you think of it, many colleagues who have been on board during the pandemic, they hadn't had that opportunity to experience the benefit of in-person culture within organization. That what I talk about, the real human energy, the real human touch, they haven't had that. So I think one thing organizations should start doing, and we're doing it here at The Economist, is creating safe in-person events where we are bringing teams that not necessarily your direct teams, as Chisholm mentioned, but teams in other departments, and give you the opportunity to make that human connection to say, hey, my name is Jack. I work in another team that connects with yours. Some people, after doing so many virtual meetings, some people do turn their cameras off because it affects your eyes of staring at the screen. So sometimes you don't even get that. There's that disconnect. So creating that in person, taking people back to that human side of where we could just stand and talk, I think is one way. We have those events, making sure it's safe for everyone. We're doing something called also, it's a away day where we're gonna rent an area in somewhere in Middle England, if there's such a place, and make sure that you can come and unwind. They should have spa, and we play games and stuff like that. Celebrate birthdays, all the missed birthdays, and all the babies who were born, and all the weddings that were missed, and just to bring back that human touch. Because remember, pre-COVID, we had these connections. We weren't even thinking about them. They just happened naturally. So getting that, especially for our people, our colleagues who identify as extroverts, because they're suffering the most. They need that people energy. I'm an ambivert, so I could go both ways. So those are the little things you can start with.
That got me just thinking about like any initiatives or projects that we do. There needs to be a conscious thinking about it. Like it really needs to be mechanical almost in thinking, we're going to do this. This is the inputs. These are the outputs. These are the impacts. These are the outcomes we want to see. Because I think this is why DIB initiatives will work, is that they are conscious and intentional. But when we're kind of just reactive instead of proactive, we're just like a plastic bag in the wind, right? We're blowing ourselves wherever with, oh my gosh, it's Women's Month, let's do something. Oh, it's this month, let's do something. As opposed to having a strategic and intentional goal as to what you're doing, and also understanding that you don't have to do everything. Pick something specific that works, and achievable. 1, 2, 3 things max that works for your organization, and focus on that and do that well. And then when that is achieved, make sure you have an enabling environment to nurture that before you can move on to something else.
Yeah. Can I say something quickly on the soft skills that Emma mentioned? We're looking into working with a business psychologist, and Pertain is based on our organization. We're looking at that, and I think a business psychologist can help you flush out the soft skills. They could do a skill gap analysis. They look at the roles that you have within your organization and the type of skills needs to execute those roles, and they can then come up with they use psychometric assessments and so forth. I know there's a lot of negativity around it, but if you target it for specific areas where you want the results, you can be able to identify soft skills. Yes, they're not like hard skills where you go to university and you learn how to do coding or something like that, but soft skills more, how do we communicate and connect with each other? Or maybe someone who's not good at listening, they need active listening. Some colleagues of yours, we all experienced it during the team meeting, and they try to finish your sentences before you could finish them. So those are some of the little nuances and a lot of the little things. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you for adding that, Norbert. We actually have been having a little bit of conversations going on in the chat, because in terms of the conversation around storytelling, because Irmina mentioned that according to research, when we hear stories from people, same neutrons light up in our brains, which means that we get close to actually experiencing how it felt for the storyteller. This is why stories are very powerful. And Nikki also mentioned that many psychotherapists would say that people make decisions irrationally and unconsciously first, and then they rationalize it consciously. So the very first moment is not as rational as we think. And they're just not necessarily aware of that process. So I think the storytelling part of it is just as important as the data part of it. So thank you both. Irmina and Nikki. And we have 4 minutes left into the session. So yes, Norbert, I see you
I
are.
just want to, yeah, based on the story, just a quick tip for everyone. Most people probably came across it, but there's a great video out on microaggressive behaviors that anyone as a D&I practitioner should get it. It's on LinkedIn, it's all over the place. It shows how when you mispronounce someone's name or you treat them, it's just through acting and you can really get the message. So it's a great way of, I remember you said, Samit, how you convey, these things over to, individuals. That video is so powerful. When you watch it, it just transcended and sends the message. It hit home very quickly. And you guys should check it out and share it to your teams about, the importance of microaggressions and how, how to spot them and how to handle them and call them out. It's a great video out there.
It's a short movie, around 3 minutes. I also saw it on LinkedIn.
Yes, it's incredible.
We will share it on the wall of Diversify, just so that people can have access to that video. Thank you for mentioning it.
And we can also probably include it in the email we send after this as well.
Yes, very true, because our next panel discussion is also coming up next month. So we will definitely send you all emails, just wrapping up what we have discussed today, and to tell you a little bit about what are we going to discuss next month. But before we close up the session, I would just like to ask our panelists whether they have any last thoughts that they would like to share with our audience on the topic of creating a human-centric hybrid work environment.
I'm just going to say I'm super thankful to Norbert and Sumit. They are two people I really respect in the work that they do and in the people that they manage and in how they do it with grace and humility. So I'm just really happy that, they agreed to come on here and share their insights. So I'm really thankful. So thank you for your time. And I guess to everyone, just, curiosity is key. Be curious. And when you make a mistake, own it and be curious and figure out how you can do better.
And I just want to say thank you for having me here, guys. Susanna, Chisholm, Samit, nice to meet you. And thank you for our audience. And like I said, it's great talking. We share as practitioners. And one thing I do not have all the answers because I do bug Chisholm and her team a lot, and I am always learning. Because that's the best way I could support my colleagues. If I learn and I picked up best practices and knowledge and tips and tools and be able to apply it in the organization, they're the ones who will benefit from it. So Samit, I picked up a lot of things from you, and I will start bothering you a little bit more. Probably send you a contract to start working with us here. but it was great to meet everyone.
Yeah, likewise, everyone. Thank you. Really glad to be invited, and it's like it's crazy that we get paid for this, right? We just talk and somebody's actually listening. It's just this is the hobby and what's close to our hearts. So it's really loved it. Learned a lot. Likewise, Norbert and Chisholm, amazing and really good questions from the audience as well. So really love this. So I hope I'll get invited again.
Definitely, we'll be happy to have you.
Yes. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. And Norbert and Sumit, I'm already hounding you down for the next thing in August. So yes, I look forward to it.